The scent of him was wrong. It wasn't the familiar aroma of cedarwood and rain that she had memorized since childhood. The scent that was supposed to be hers alone. It was tainted, corrupted by the sickly, sweet fragrance of gardenia, the signature scent of Victoria, the pack's most desired beta female. The bonfire crackled in the mountain clearing, but a colder frost was creeping through Aurora's veins. Laughter and triumphant howls of the annual hunt echoed around her, but all she could hear was the frantic, panicked drumming of her own heart. She was invisible until the moment of her destruction. The whispers had followed her all evening, sticky and cruel as cobwebs. Wolfless Omega. A hollow shell. How can she possibly anchor an alpha like Cameron? She had ignored them, clinging to the fragile promise of the mate bond, the one sacred thread the goddess was said to grant to every shifter. But as she rounded the ancient pine that marked the edge of the clearing, she saw the truth of her worth. He was pressed against the rough bark, his powerful form caging Victoria's slender, eager body. His hands, the same hands that had cupped her face just that morning and promised her forever, were tangled in Victoria's blonde hair, and he was kissing her. A deep, possessive kiss that staked a claim Aurora had only ever dreamed of. The sacred bond in her chest didn't just crack. It violently shattered, sending shards of ice and fire through every nerve. She felt it as a physical tearing, a howl of phantom pain from the wolf she didn't have. And in that moment, she knew this humiliation was not just an accident. It was a statement. Cameron pulled back, his breathing ragged. He saw her then, his green eyes, once warm as summer meadows, hardened into chips of jade. There was no remorse, no shock, only cold, dismissive cruelty. Victoria's lips curved into a triumphant smirk, her gaze sweeping over Aurora's simple cotton dress with open contempt. "Aurora Bennett," Cameron said, his voice flat. He didn't bother to disentangle himself from Victoria, who practically purred, rubbing her cheek against his chest and marking him again with her scent. The sound of her name from his lips was acid. The pack, drawn by the sudden suffocating silence, began to turn. Faces emerged from the firelight, eyes wide with morbid curiosity. The whispers grew louder, bolder. "Cameron!" The word was a broken thing, a whisper of sound stolen by the wind. She could feel the mate bond, or what was left of it, writhing in her soul like a dying serpent, poisoning her from the inside. The pain was excruciating, a constant sharp pressure behind her ribs. "This isn't working," he stated, his words as clean and sharp as a butcher's knife. "I need a real mate. A strong alpha needs a she-wolf who can run at his side, not this." He gestured vaguely at her, an emotion that encompassed her entire being, her lack of a wolf, her Omega status, her quiet nature. He was dismissing her entire existence. Victoria giggled, a sound like tiny malicious bells. "He needs a wolf who can give him heirs, Aurora. Strong, alpha-blooded pups, not barren air." The word hit her like a physical blow. Barren. It was the pack's deepest shame, the ultimate failure for a she-wolf. Without a wolf of her own, her body was considered an empty vessel, incapable of carrying the next generation of shifters. You promised," she whispered, her hands trembling at her sides. She felt the eyes of the entire Redwood pack on her, their pity a thick, suffocating blanket. Cameron finally pushed Victoria away gently, stepping forward. For a terrifying second, she thought he might show a flicker of the man she loved, a hint of regret. She was wrong. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, his grip hard and unforgiving. He pulled her hand up, revealing the faint silvery mark of their pre-bond, shimmering on her skin like a brand of shame. "I reject this bond," he declared, his voice ringing with the formal power of his alpha blood. "I, Cameron Reed of the Redwood Pack, sever all ties to Aurora Bennett. She is no mate of mine. She is wolfless. She is barren. She is nothing." The pain that ripped through her was blinding. The silver mark on her wrist flared with white-hot agony before dissolving into nothing, leaving behind an angry red patch of skin that felt scoured raw. A scream built in her throat, but it wouldn't come out. She was mute with agony, drowning in a sea of contemptuous faces. He released her, and she stumbled back, her legs failing her. As Cameron turned and draped his arm around Victoria, pulling her back toward the warmth and celebration of the bonfire, the pack parted for them. Then they closed ranks, turning their backs on Aurora. One by one, they turned away, leaving her utterly alone in the cold darkness at the edge of the clearing. The message was clear. She was no longer one of them. She was an outcast. Nothing. Something inside her snapped. It wasn't logic. It wasn't reason. It was pure, primal survival. Without a backward glance at the pack that had discarded her, she turned and fled. She ran, heedless of the branches that tore at her dress and scratched her skin. She ran from the laughter, from the pity, from the ghost of Cameron's touch. She ran until her lungs burned and her vision blurred with tears of rage and pain. She crossed the scent-marked border of her own territory, plunging into the neutral lands, a lawless stretch of woods where anything could happen. Her frantic flight led her to a place she had been warned about her entire life, the Crossroads Inn. It was a rough timber-framed tavern that catered to rogues, travelers, and exiles. Smoke curled from its chimney against the moonlit sky. The air here was a chaotic mess of scents, strange wolves, stale ale, desperation, and danger. Pushing through the heavy oak door, she stumbled into a wall of sound and heat. The place was crowded, filled with grim-faced shifters whose eyes held the hard glint of survival. They looked up as she entered. They smelled the redwood pack on her, but they also smelled her distress, the raw, open wound of her rejection. A few sneered, others looked away, uninterested in another's misery. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for, she didn't even know what. An anchor, a weapon, a fire to fight fire. And then she saw him. He was sitting in the darkest corner of the room, alone at a heavy wooden table. The shadows seemed to cling to him, to obey him. He was large, built on a scale that made the other formidable shifters in the room look like ordinary men. A dark, hooded cloak obscured his features, but she could feel the sheer crushing weight of his presence. It was a physical force, an aura of silent, absolute power that bent the very atmosphere of the tavern around him. His scent cut through the chaotic miasma like a bolt of lightning. It was ancient and wild, the smell of ozone after a storm, of deep, cold earth and the sharp, clean scent of a mountain peak where the air was thin and merciless. Driven by an impulse she couldn't name, Aurora moved toward him. The other patrons shifted out of her way, their eyes following her with a mixture of fear and awe, as if she were walking willingly into a predator's den. She stopped before his table. He didn't look up. A half-empty glass of amber liquid sat before one of his large gloved hands. Her voice was a dry rasp. She swallowed, forcing the words out. I need your help. He remained perfectly still. She could feel his gaze on her from beneath the deep cowl of his hood, an intense, unnerving weight. I need you to bind with me, she whispered, the words tasting like ash and shame. Just for tonight. A temporary bond, to sever another. A low murmur rippled through the tavern. To ask such a thing of a stranger was unheard of, a grave insult, or a suicidal plea. The stranger finally moved. He lifted his head slowly, and the shadows seemed to part for him. She still couldn't see his face clearly, only the strong line of a jaw shadowed with stubble, and a mouth set in a hard, unreadable line. But she saw his eyes. They glowed with a soft internal light, the color of molten amber. They were the eyes of a wolf so powerful, so old that his human form could barely contain the beast within. He said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Please, she begged, placing a trembling hand on the edge of his table. I will give you anything. His amber eyes held hers. A deep, resonant sound rumbled in his chest, less a word and more the feeling of a distant earthquake. Anything? His voice was low gravel, a sound that vibrated not in her ears, but deep in her bones. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. With fluid grace that was terrifying in a man his size, he rose. He towered over her, a mountain of shadow and power. He reached out, his gloved hand gently taking her chin, tilting her face up to the dim light. His touch was surprisingly careful, yet it sent a jolt of raw energy through her, silencing the last vestiges of Cameron's ghost. He studied her face, his gilded gaze tracing her tear-stained cheeks, her trembling lips, the abject desperation in her eyes. He leaned down, his voice a breath against her ear, meant for her alone. "You are asking to trade a dog for a dragon, little one. Are you certain?" She didn't understand his words, but she understood the choice. Annihilation, or this? She gave another desperate, jerky nod. He let out a soft, humorless sound that might have been a chuckle. "Very well." He lowered his head to the side of her neck. She flinched, her body screaming at her to run, but she held herself rigid. She felt the ghost of a touch, his lips brushing her skin, and then the sharp, piercing sting as his canines sank into the sensitive flesh just above her pulse point. The pain was electric, but it was the power that followed, that stole her breath. It was not the familiar, earthy energy of a pack wolf. This was a torrent, a tidal wave of ancient, untamed magic that flooded her system. It was cold as the void between stars, and hot as a forge's heart. It roared through her veins, a cleansing fire that vaporized every last trace of Cameron's touch, his scent, his memory. It burned away the broken bond, the shame, the rejection, leaving nothing but the overwhelming, terrifying reality of the man holding her. The world tilted. The sounds of the tavern faded into a distant hum. The last thing she felt was his arm sliding around her waist, holding her up as her knees buckled. The last thing she heard was a low, possessive growl that rumbled through his chest and into hers. Her senses dissolved into the all-encompassing scent of storm and stone, and then only darkness. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the gentle quiet of the forest, but a deep, profound stillness that seemed to absorb all sound. It was the silence of stone and immense space, heavy and ancient. The second thing was the scent. The chaotic, sour miasma of the tavern was gone. In its place was the clean, sharp fragrance of beeswax, dried herbs, and overlying it all, that same impossible scent from the stranger. Ozone, cold mountain stone, and a hint of something wild and deeply masculine. Aurora's eyes fluttered open. She was not on the dirt floor of a tavern. She was lying on a mattress so soft it felt like sinking into a cloud, covered by sheets of cool, heavy silk. Panic lanced through her. She sat up in a rush, the silken sheet pooling around her waist. She was still in her torn, grimy dress from the night before, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. The room was vast. The walls were dark, polished stone, hung with heavy tapestries depicting epic hunts and ancient battles. A colossal fireplace took up one wall, a low fire crackling within. The floor was covered in thick, dark furs. This was a place of immense wealth and power. Her hand flew to her neck, to the place where the stranger had bitten her. Her fingers met a mark, not a wound, but a pattern of raised, smooth skin like an intricate scar. It tingled with steady energy, a hum that resonated deep within her chest. The ghost of Cameron was gone. The gaping wound in her soul had been filled, not healed, but occupied by this new, formidable presence. "You are awake." The voice came from the shadows near the fireplace. It was the same low, gravelly timbre that had vibrated through her bones in the tavern. Aurora's head snapped toward the sound, her heart leaping into her throat. He stepped out of the shadows and into the firelight. The hooded cloak was gone, and the sight of him stole the air from her lungs. He was a king carved from the very mountain his scent evoked. Taller and broader than she had realized, his shoulders a solid line of power beneath a simple black tunic. His dark hair was long, threaded with a few strands of silver at the temples, and tied back from a face that was all harsh angles and brutal experience. A jagged scar ran from his right temple down across his cheekbone, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same molten amber, glowing with their own internal light, intelligent, ancient, and utterly merciless. Who are you?" she breathed, pulling the silk sheet up to her chin like a shield. He moved toward the bed, his footsteps utterly silent. He stopped a few feet away, a respectful distance that somehow felt more intimidating than aggression. "I am the man whose help you begged for," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The stranger to whom you offered anything." He let the word hang in the air between them, heavy with implication. Aurora flinched, the shame of her desperation washing over her. "It was meant to be a temporary bond, a ritual to sever my previous one. It's over now. I can leave." "No." The single word was not a shout, but it hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was a statement of absolute, unarguable fact. Her muscles froze. "The bond you initiated was not a simple tavern ritual, little one," he continued, his amber eyes never leaving hers. "You took a spark to burn away a splinter, but you placed that spark in the hands of an inferno. The bond holds. My wolf has accepted it. He has accepted you." Her blood ran cold. "Your wolf? But no one's wolf would accept a wolfless Omega. A barren she-wolf." The words were bitter poison on her tongue. A flicker of something dangerous sparked in his eyes. "My wolf is not like those of lesser alphas. He does not care for the mewling politics of pack status. He cares for strength, and he senses a strength in you that you do not even know you possess." He took another step closer. "As for who I am Theron Drake." The name meant nothing to her at first, just a name. But then fragmented whispers from traveling merchants and fearful elders pieced themselves together in her mind. Drake, the name of the royal line. Theron, the Alpha King, the reclusive, brutal monarch of all the Highland territories. A king so powerful and feared that other alphas trembled when his patrols crossed their lands. The wolf who had ruled for 50 years without a mate, rejecting every high-born she-wolf presented to him. Aurora felt the world tilt. The silk sheet suddenly felt like a shroud. She had run from the cruelty of a pack alpha and thrown herself into the den of the king of all alphas. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "It can't be. You're the king." It was an accusation, a plea, a whimper of pure terror. "I am," he confirmed, his expression unchanging. "And by the old law, a bond freely offered and accepted by the Alpha King is not temporary. It is absolute. You are bound to me, Aurora of the Redwood Pack." "I am not of the Redwood Pack," she snapped, a flare of her old pain rising. "They cast me out." "They did," he agreed, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "And in their foolishness, they discarded a treasure they were not worthy of. Their loss." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her. "You have a new pack now. You have a new alpha. You are here, under my protection." "Protection." She laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "This isn't protection. This is a prison." "A gilded one, perhaps," he conceded with a slight humorless tilt of his lips. "But a prison is meant to hold someone against their will. I am not holding you. The bond is a bond you sought." He was right. The logic was as cold and inescapable as the stone walls around her. This was a cage of her own making. A servant entered silently, carrying a tray. She set it down on a table near the fire and bowed her head to Aurora before backing out of the room. On the tray was a steaming pot of tea, fresh bread, cheese, and fruit. "Eat," Theron commanded gently. "You collapsed from exhaustion and pain. You need your strength." She eyed the food, then him. "I'm not hungry." It was a childish act of defiance, the only power she had left. Theron's jaw tightened slightly. He walked to the tray, poured a cup of tea, and brought it to her. He didn't offer it. He simply stood beside the bed, holding it, waiting. The silence stretched. The aroma of the herbal tea was calming, and despite herself, her throat was painfully dry. Defeated, she finally reached out a trembling hand and took the warm cup. Her fingers brushed his, and a jolt of pure energy shot up her arm. She took a sip, the warm liquid a small comfort. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice small. He watched her for a long moment. "For now, I want you to rest, to heal, to understand that the world that hurt you can no longer touch you here." His voice was low, hypnotic. "Cameron Reed cannot touch you. Victoria cannot mock you. The pack that turned its back on you is nothing more than a bad memory. Here, you are safe." The word safe was so foreign, so deeply craved, that it almost broke her. "And after that?" she pressed. "When I'm healed, am I to be your pet? Your Omega slave in a castle?" A low growl rumbled in Theron's chest, a sound of pure, undiluted fury that made the very air vibrate. "You will never be a slave," he bit out, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. His amber eyes flared. "You are the mate of the Alpha King. You bear my mark. Anyone who dares to show you disrespect will answer to me with their life." He reached out, his hand moving with slow, deliberate purpose. He gently cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking the line of her cheek. "I have spent a lifetime ensuring no bond could be forced upon me," he murmured, his gaze intense. "I swore I would never take a mate. I built a fortress of solitude around this throne. And then you, a broken little bird with a storm in your heart, walked into a rogue's tavern and tore it all down with a single desperate plea." He leaned closer, his scent enveloping her. "You are not my prisoner," he whispered. "You are my queen." The words hung in the air, a pronouncement, a prophecy. Before she could process their impossible weight, the great wooden doors to the chamber swung open. A man in formal attire stood there, his face pale. "Your Majesty," the man said, his voice trembling as he bowed low. "Forgive the intrusion, but the news has spread. The council has been convened. They demand to see her." Theron did not turn. His amber eyes remained locked on Aurora, but the warmth had vanished, replaced by the chilling glint of a monarch interrupted. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest. "They demand?" Theron's voice was deceptively soft, yet it carried the sharp edge of steel. "Forgive my wording, Your Majesty," the advisor stammered. "They urgently request an audience. The alphas of the inner circle are gathering. They say a bond with an unknown is a threat to the stability of the Highland territories." The unspoken insult hung in the air. A bond with a wolfless Omega. A nobody. Aurora shrank back against the headboard. She had traded the judgment of a pack for the judgment of an entire kingdom. Theron's thumb stroked her jaw once more, a possessive gesture, before he finally pulled his hand away. He turned slowly, fixing the advisor with a look of cold authority. "Tell the council I will meet them at midday. Not before." "But Your Majesty, they are insisting—" "And I am commanding." Theron cut him off, his voice dropping into a register of pure, unassailable power. The advisor's mouth snapped shut. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. "As you command, Your Majesty." He backed out of the room, pulling the heavy doors shut behind him. The silence that fell was charged with tension. "They want to see the freak," Aurora said, the words brittle. "The wolfless Omega who dared to taint their precious royal bloodline." Theron turned back to her, and the glacial fury in his eyes had been replaced by something complex and unreadable. "They want to see the woman who accomplished what no Alpha's daughter ever could. They want to see the one who holds my bond." He moved to the foot of the bed. "They want to destroy me," she countered, her voice shaking. "Let them try." The words were a vow, a promise of violence so profound it made her shiver. He gestured to a large wardrobe. "Clothes have been laid out for you. Bathe, dress, eat. I will return before midday." "Wait," she called out. He paused, his hand on the latch, and looked back at her. "Why?" she asked, the question raw. "Why me?" You could have refused. Why would your wolf accept a bond with nothing? Theron was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of the royal command. Because for the first time in a century, he said, my wolf was not met with ambition, not with lust for power. He was met with pure, honest desperation, with pain that mirrored his own solitude. He looked at you and did not see an Omega. He saw a survivor, and he recognized a kindred soul. He swept from the room, the doors closing behind him with a heavy thud. Left alone, his words replayed in her mind, pain that mirrored his own solitude. The ruthless, untouchable Alpha King was lonely. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Theron hadn't merely offered her protection. He was preparing her to rule. Her mornings were spent in the royal library with Lord Valerian, learning the histories of the great packs, their bloodlines, their ancient grudges. She discovered that Theron's father, the Mad King, had nearly destroyed the kingdom by favoring pureblood alphas. Theron's 50-year reign had been spent stitching the fractured territories back together through sheer force of will. Afternoons were with Theron himself in the map room, learning strategy, understanding the delicate balance of power he maintained. But it was the evenings that changed her most. Theron took her to the training yards. At first she merely watched, but one evening he drew her into the center of the arena. You do not have a wolf's strength, he said, pressing a slender dagger into her hand. But you have a wolf spirit. You have speed, a keen mind, and the will to survive. That is more than enough. Under his patient, demanding tutelage, she began to learn. He taught her how to hold the blade, how to use an opponent's weight against them. He was terrifyingly graceful, moving with fluid power. He never hurt her, but he never went easy either. And in the sweat and dust of the training yard, something inside her shifted. The timid, fearful Omega was being flayed away, revealing a core of tempered steel beneath. The bond between them deepened with every passing day. Their nights were spent in his chambers, but not as she might have expected. They would talk for hours by the fire. He slept on furs on the floor, giving her the bed. A gesture of respect so profound, it touched her more than any caress. He was courting her, not as an alpha claiming a mate, but as a man earning a woman's trust. The final confrontation came during the Harvest Moon Festival. The Great Hall was filled to capacity with pack alphas and their mates, dressed in their finest. Aurora stood beside the throne, not behind it. Theron had insisted. She wore a gown of deep forest green embroidered with silver thread. On her neck, the bond mark seemed to glow. One by one, the alphas came forward to present their tithes. When Lord Brennan of the Frost Peak Pack stepped forward, tension fell over the hall. Your Majesty, he said stiffly, I bring the tithes of Frost Peak and renew my vow of loyalty to the throne. But Brennan didn't step back. Majesty, the harvest moon is also a time of concern for the future. For 50 years we have had a king, but a kingdom needs an heir. A true-blooded alpha heir to secure the future. The challenge was laid bare. It was a direct attack on Aurora's perceived weakness, her supposed barrenness. The hall erupted in murmurs. Before Theron could unleash the fury building in his eyes, Aurora held up a hand, commanding silence. She stepped forward, descending to stand on the same level as Brennan. You speak of bloodlines, Lord Brennan, she said, her voice calm and clear. You speak of the strength of the wolf. For my entire life, I have been judged by the wolf I do not have. She looked at the faces in the crowd. You believe that strength is only born from an alpha womb. You cling to the old ways, the very ways that allowed the Mad King to tear this kingdom apart. She turned to look up at Theron. Our king has spent 50 years proving that true strength lies not in blood, but in will, not in lineage, but in leadership. She turned back to Brennan. You worry about an heir. You think the future rests in the womb of its queen? You are mistaken. The future rests in unity, in abandoning the foolish prejudices, that have kept us fighting among ourselves. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. You see me as barren, but the old magic that binds me to your king is far more ancient than your petty concerns. As she spoke, she focused her will, reaching deep inside to the bond, to the well of power Theron had shared with her. She pulled on that power. Her eyes began to glow. Not the fierce amber of Theron's wolf, but a soft, luminous silver like moonlight itself. The light grew, bathing the hall in ethereal glow. A collective gasp swept through. The spectral image of a great wolf made of pure moonlight shimmered into existence behind her. It was vast, ancient, powerful. Its silver eyes filled with wisdom that transcended time. It was her spirit, her wolf, the one that had been sleeping inside her all along, awakened by a bond not of fate, but of choice, of love. The goddess does not make mistakes, Lord Brennan, Aurora said, her voice resonating with faint echo. She does not create hollow vessels. She merely waits for a soul worthy enough to see the strength within. The spectral wolf faded, and the silver light receded, leaving her standing there, trembling, but resolute. Lord Brennan stared, his face a mask of shock and terror. He dropped to his knees. Your Majesty, he whispered. Forgive me. One by one throughout the great hall, the Alphas sank to their knees. They did not bow to Theron. They bowed to her. Theron descended from the dais. His eyes shone with fierce pride and love, so profound, it stole her breath. He took her hand and raised it for all to see. Behold your queen, he roared. The Alpha is the strength of the pack, but the Omega is its heart. And our heart is strong. The assembled wolves let out a unified howl of fealty, not of submission, but of celebration. A sound of a new age being born. 5 years passed. The harsh winds still blew from the mountains, but the soul of the kingdom had found a new warmth. The whispers against the wolfless queen had died, replaced by legends. They called her Aurora the Wise, the Moon Blessed, the Queen of Spirit. She traveled with Theron across their domain, not just to the great keeps, but to small villages. She listened. She established trade routes, mediated disputes, created a system where even the lowest-born shifter had a voice. The fortress had transformed. Herbs and flowers grew in courtyards. The laughter of children, wards of the court whom Aurora had taken under her protection, echoed in halls that had once known only the tread of armored boots. It was a home. Aurora stood on the battlements where Theron had first kissed her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows. She was no longer the frail, broken girl who had fled. Her quietness remained, but it was now the quiet of a deep, still lake, confident in its own depths. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind. Theron rested his chin on her shoulder. You are looking at the horizon again, he murmured. Are you plotting to annex the southern kingdoms, my love? She smiled, leaning back against him. No, just admiring our world. Below in the training yard, 2 figures were sparring. One was a tall boy of 16, Lyle. The other was a girl, barely 14, small, but impossibly quick. Her name was Kira, a wolfless Omega discovered starving after being cast out. Aurora had taken her in, seeing a reflection of her own past, and Kira was winning. She has your spirit, Theron said, and your grace. She will be captain of your guard one day. She will be whatever she chooses to be, Aurora corrected. That is the kingdom we have built. A place where worth is measured by will, not by birth. Theron turned her in his arms. I was a king of stone and shadow before you came, he said. I ruled a kingdom, but I did not have a home. You gave me that. She reached up, tracing the old scar on his cheek. And you gave a ghost a voice. You saw a queen, when all I saw was a survivor. Later, as the moon climbed high, they were alone in their chambers. The fire crackled. Aurora sat brushing her hair while Theron stood by the window. No regrets? She asked softly. He turned, a smile gracing his lips. He walked to her, knelt before her, as he had done on that first day, taking her hands in his. My only regret, he said, is that I wasted 50 years on a throne of stone when I could have been building a throne of moonlight with you. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that held the memory of every trial they had faced, every battle won, every quiet moment shared. She was Aurora Drake. She was not wolfless. She was the heart of the wolf. She was not barren. She was the mother of a new age. She was not nothing. She was and would always be his everything. And in the heart of the unforgiving highlands, under the light of the eternal moon, the queen and her king had finally, truly come home.